Probably will notice as I talk that my voice isn't what it normally is. You don't have to worry that I'm going to give you something. It's not something you're going to get. I've been struggling with this for a couple weeks now. Something I did irritated my voice, which really irritates me. I have discovered this past week how much I depend upon my voice for just about everything, and I don't like the sense of being out of control. But maybe there's something good to learn from that experience. Paula points out that this often is called Good Shepherd Sunday. And it's called Good Shepherd Sunday because we get the 23rd Psalm and we get to hear from the 10th chapter of John where we hear some shepherd language. You know, when I, this week, initially confronted these readings, I found myself experiencing what we might call intimacy. The journey with Jesus and with the God of Jesus, if these readings are any indication, is not some kind of detached encounter with a distant other God. The journey is intimate. It's personally real. And you can tell about the personal character of this journey from the 23rd Psalm and its use of the I pronoun all the time. I shall not want, even though I walk through the darkest valley. I fear no evil. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Now, a lot of times when you hear the pronoun I used frequently, you think that the person is self-absorbed, too concerned about him or herself. But I don't think this is the case for the psalmist today. For him, rather, God is, in this case, thought to be personally real. The I, in other words, is cared for. The I is cared for, especially in times of trouble, in experiences of evil and dark valleys. For the psalmist, God is a shepherd, a helper, a protector, a leader in the best possible way. Now, John's discussion of Jesus as the shepherd of the sheep, as the one who calls his sheep by name and has a voice that the sheep will recognize and will respond to, that also seems so intimate to me. The knowing the sheep by name reminds me of the theme song from the great television show Cheers. Sometimes you just want to go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. I really understand that. I like to go where people know my name, where they call out, "Hey, Bill." We all want to belong. And Jesus says today, in him there's belonging. In him, he claims, there's abundant life. He is a shepherd who brings the sheep in and then leads them out, unlike many of the false shepherds who promise much but end up destroying and killing. Our shepherd loves us, and we, his sheep, know him so well that his voice resonates in our ears. Frankly, we generally recognize the voice of love. My son Jacob has a new dog whose name is Benny. Those of you old enough to remember Benny and the Jets. All right. Benny is a puppy, and he's a nervous wreck when Jesus, holy Toledo. Boy, that really missed the, wow, when Jacob isn't around. He whines and he squeals and he runs all over the place. Benny really gets on my nerves. But when Jacob comes home and speaks his name, Benny becomes sane again. Benny knows Jacob's voice. The two of them are interconnected deeply. This is the kind of intimacy that you and I live in light of. We are connected. We are known by name. We are shepherded. The voice of our leader we recognize. We are pursued. The translation we use today is follow. The better word is we are pursued by mercy and goodness all the days of our lives. Intimacy and love, community and belonging are ours. In fact, they are pursuing us. And I suspect Luke understood that. And this is really what I want to talk about today. All that other is just introduction. I want to get to the main point here. Luke, the author of the book of Acts, gives us such an intimate vision of the early church. And yes, I have to admit, it's an idyllic, idealized version of the early church. I mean, come on. Am I supposed to believe that all who believed were together and had all things in common? I am sure that someone held back their favorite dishes because they were afraid a member of the group would bust them. And I'm sure somebody had a secret wad of money hidden someplace. And also, am I supposed to believe that day by day they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people? I mean, really? There weren't people who whined about, we cooked more often than they did, or we hosted the event more often than they did. I am sure that there was sad people who said, I didn't like that chili that Silas made at all. I mean, didn't you make it right? After all, there's only one way to make good chili. You mean to tell me there weren't crabby people who complained just about everything? You know, the menu, the color of the carpet, and noisy kids. I'm sure there were. Luke is giving us an idealized version of the early church. And we can respond to that idealized version by dismissing it. Well, this never worked here. Or we can catch the vision and begin to live into it. Now, the first thing that needs to be said about Luke's description of the early church is that what is going on there is the consequence of the work of the Spirit of the resurrected Christ. This is not just good people who decided that we all should just get along. This is not just good people who had an idea that, if we just share everything in common, everything will be good. No, this is what happens when the Spirit of the resurrected Christ gets loose in the church. And let's examine how Luke describes this. They, that is the early Christian community, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of the bread and to prayers. First of all, they focused on the apostles' teaching. What they gathered around was not simply their opinion. Now, your opinions are really fascinating. They are. They're really interesting. My opinion is probably more fascinating than yours. But I got to tell you this, they are not the center of our life together. There is a focus larger than the opinions, the apostles' teaching. Now, I am sure, as Gary Hansen wondered about at our Bible study on Wednesday, that sometimes some folks got tired of hearing the teachings of the apostles. Oh, all right. We know you were there and we weren't there. You had a closer experience with Jesus than we did. La-dee-da. Do we got to listen to this again? Well, that probably occurred. But note nonetheless, life in the Christian community is not shaped simply by what we think, which is in part, by the way, why we as a church gather week after week under the Scriptures. A community based on our opinions, religious opinions, political opinions, is a community that is less about the Spirit of God and more about us. In communities based on opinion, God starts to look an awful lot like us. Again, going on, Luke says they devoted themselves to not only to the teachings of the apostles, but to fellowship and to the breaking of the bread. Getting together is essential. Fellowship is integral to who we are and to who we are to become. Lone Ranger Christianity is not what occurs when the Spirit of God gets loose among us. You see, the Spirit of God drives us together. Yes, Christians need alone time. No doubt they need alone time. And yes, sometimes community can be a cover-up for undeveloped selves. But the resurrection of Christ is about the mending not just of the self, but the mending of communities and ultimately the world. It's about the coming together of all things. To be a Christian is to be in community. And when you're in community, should remind me not to preach so hard, because this is what hurts my voice, all right? Remind me, all right? When you are in community, you break bread. And the reference is, without a doubt, to eating together and probably also to sharing in communion together. Because in the early church, communion was a part of a group meal. You had a potluck, and in the middle of the potluck, you took into yourself the body and blood of Jesus. Now, in case you haven't noted, and I think in some ways Gary Hansen, when I was an intern here, helped me understand this, that eating together is really important for Christians. There is something that happens in meals that doesn't happen any place else. Shared food, shared Jesus in the form of bread and wine ties people together. So, invite people into your homes to have dinner. Participate in our group meals. Those ordinary experiences often have extraordinary results, which, by the way, is what communion communicates to us. Ordinary bread, ordinary wine become the extraordinary encounter with the crucified and risen Jesus. So communion, therefore, is not something we ought to do once in a while, but regularly, which is why we do it every week in the early church. They did it every week and maybe sometimes even every day. Again, from Luke, they devoted themselves to the breaking of the bread and to the prayers. Now, that probably is a reference to the public prayer and ritual gatherings of the early church, perhaps in the temple. A part of the early church's routine was, we'd put it this way, going to church, gathering for public prayer and worship, at least weekly. But those public gatherings were not the totality of what it meant to be the church. Church occurred every day. The Spirit moved every day. The presence of the bodily resurrected Christ had practical implications for everyday living. And that is the point to their holding everything in common. They're sharing possessions, and they're attending to those who need economic help. Taking care of the needy is not an option for the Christian community. Physical, economic life is very important. We're in this together, and we share our stuff with one another. Yes, it's true, others won't always take care of our possessions as we would, but sharing goods with one another is what happens when the Spirit of God gets loose. Others have needs, and what do? We respond practically by sharing sometimes our cars and our time and our food and our homes. And by the way, we are especially, if the early church's experience is any indication, we're especially attentive to those who are fragile, vulnerable, or poor. It's, by the way, just what we do. We give away our money so that community is built, and so that hurting folks are taken care of. And we do all of this, breaking bread, being taught by the Scriptures, gathering for public prayer, sharing our economic means, with an awareness that new folks need to be a part of this. Day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Growth is necessary for Christian community. Yes, we shouldn't judge life, church life, on the basis of how many people are in the pews or how big our budget is. Church life is not a game to be won, but it is a community to grow. New people are essential to our life together. You who are new here, by the way, what a gift you are. You are not a disruption to our common life. You are not an invasive species. You are an essential part of our life together. You make us more whole. And you are a part of the reason we exist here in the first place. And we love it that the Lord is adding to the number of those who are finding hope and healing in our midst. It is a real privilege, a real gift of the Spirit of the resurrected Christ to live within the intimacy that is Christian community. In that kind of intimacy, we will not simply survive, but we're going to thrive. Jesus says, I came that they might have life and they might have it abundantly. Shepherd us, O God. Shepherd us into the abundant, community-saturated life. Amen.